It's not very long now before the shores of Pandaria get stormed by thousands of players, and one thing that most players worry about during expansion launches is, will my class suck, and will I need to re-roll the second I reach level 90? Well, today we are starting a series evaluating the performance and viability of all the classes in Mists of Pandaria Classic. We shall begin by discussing the absolute gods of the expansion, the classes that are strong and viable in every raid tier, and the best classes to push competitive PvP rankings. We begin with the Warlock. Every Warlock spec excels in MoP. Affliction and Destro will likely be the most commonly played spec, but different specs will obviously excel on different boss fights. And with the glyph of demon hunting, it actually made Warlock tanking semi-viable in certain situations, but mainly people mess around with it for clearing challenge modes. Affliction is scaled incredibly well with haste because it increased the tick frequency of their dots, and now it's so incredibly easy to move your dots around with Soul Swap, and the Pandemic passive means you can increase the duration of your dots by 50%. This meant that they were a country mile ahead of other DPS on multi-target fights. Destruction was more focused on maximising Chaos Bolt crits on single target situations, but their Cleave Burst DPS was also insane because they can use Havoc to duplicate your Chaos Bolt, and the Fire and Brimstone ability calls your Immolate, Incinerate and Conflagrate, and even your Curses, to cleave onto multiple targets within 10 yards. One of the deadliest and easiest comps to push ranking in MoP Classic was LSD, okay? Lock, Shaman, Druid. I remember pushing 2k rating on my Shaman playing LSD in about a week, and it was my first time playing a Shaman at max level. That's how strong this comp was. I remember it quite well. You had the Affliction Warlock focusing on spreading dots with Soul Swap, which I said earlier made dot spreading very fast and effortless, and this kept all enemy players very low health. And then you played for time, waiting for the Ellie Shaman to get lucky RNG with a chain of instant lava burst procs. I also have fond memories of stacking Destruction Warlocks in rated battlegrounds early on in Mists of Pandaria because the health pools were at their smallest in phase 1, and it meant that 3 Chaos Bolts synced together was very likely going to finish off any player, and it was the main strategy to basically hard swap to healers and count down from 5 to sync your Chaos Bolts onto a healer and watch them be obliterated into a different universe. By the way guys, if you are looking to get your Monk and your Pandaren leveled up extremely fast in the pre-patch, then the best way to do it is to get a leveling guide made by the world record holding speed levelers in the game. And the guide also includes a really good quest route for when the expansion launches, so that you can get to have a massive experience boost and advantage for when the expansion does launch. So be sure to check that out in the description down below. Next we have the Hunter. You'll probably see people mess around with most Hunter specs, but I imagine the Survival Hunter will be the most played in phase 1. The Hunter will likely be the most stacked class in 25-man raiding, particularly early on in MoP Classic, and probably the most designed DPS, especially for 10-mans, and it's simply because not only are they a strong DPS, but they bring so much buffs and debuffs to boost the DPS of every other kind of DPS, and a little mitigation for the tanks if you need it. Honestly, the Hunter really feels like a support DPS, but a support DPS that actually slaps. All of their different pets have different debuffs and buffs for both melee and spellcasters. For instance, Energizing Spores, a 5% haste buff. For spellcasters, obviously, a Ventrucia Aura, a 10% attack power buff. And there's so many more. In fact, they actually have the ability to provide 8 different raid buffs, so you can imagine this is a great way to take the buff checklist when setting up a raid comp. The Survival DPS is strong basically for the same reasons that Affliction is strong. As we all know, as while raiding progressed into each expansion, it became more mechanically challenging and required much more coordinated movement patterns from raid teams and dot to allow you to continue pushing the boss's health down while responding to mechanics. Dot DPS help push phases faster. Beast Mastery Hunters were infamous in PvP for their burst damage, largely because they actually had 6 DPS increasing cooldowns, which was just ludicrous when you consider that classes were lucky to have 1 DPS cooldown in vanilla WoW. And in phase 1 of MoP Classic, again, like everyone's going to have smaller health pools, so that's really when the burst DPS shine. They also had a lot of good utility. Their freezing trap was a very long CCC for any healer to sit in, and they could just follow up with a Wyvern Sting, which was so easy to get up because it had 40 yards range. The manoeuvrability of her disengage ability was also buffed by the first talent tier, which meant it was also very difficult to escape a hunter most of the time. And last we have the dominant melee DPS of the expansion, the Warrior. Interestingly, in MoP Classic, it's actually the arm spec that shines more than the Fury spec in both raids and PvP environments. Colossal Smash is very strong at boosting the damage of all your other abilities, and now in MoP, not only ignores 100% of the armor on the target, it causes the physical vulnerability effect, increasing physical damage taken by a further 4%. But one of the main reasons warriors are very desirable for raids, and why you will very likely see some warrior stacking in 25-man raid groups, is their new ability Skull Banner. It's like a mini Heroism or Bloodlust, to be honest. It was very overpowered and removed immediately when Warlords of Draenor are launched. It increased the crit damage of all raid members by 20% for 10 seconds. It's not crit chance, it's the critical damage modifier, which is usually by default 50%, but obviously gets increased by talent, and it does stack with other stuff like a Shaman's Elemental Fury and the Burning Primal Diamond metagem. As a raid party's critical chance increases when they get better and better gear progressing through the expansion and all the raid tiers, this raid buff becomes even more powerful. When combined with Heroism or Bloodlust, it definitely is a noticeable advantage, particularly when you have a few warriors doing it. Things like this are extremely good for pushing phases and making raid fights easier. And in PvP, warriors can actually intervene the Skull Banner to give them yet another gap closer. It really was hard to escape a warrior in MoP Classic because of Charge having 2 charges of a double tap talent, Heroic Leap, and now this intervene trick. Protection was also a solid tank in MoP, infamous mainly for its deadly shield slam crits that, with a certain glyph, the damage of it was increased by 50% and you were actually capable of one-shotting people in low-level battlegrounds. It was extremely fun. But they were overall just a solid tank to bring to challenge runs because of their high AoE DPS. In challenge modes you often do multiple trash pack pulls at once, and this is where the Protection Warrior really shined and began to produce ludicrous numbers on your DPS meter. And there we have the gods of MoP Classic. Don't be surprised if you see many people bringing these classes to raids, but just because these classes stand out the most doesn't mean that the other classes aren't as good. Rogue, Shaman and Mage are also very strong in this expansion, but we'll talk about that later in my upcoming winners and losers videos. Anyway, my name is Metagoblin. Until my next video, ciao.